Washington Journal continues.
Filmmaker, political commentator, author Dinesh D'Souza is at our desk, stopping in today as he is on his book tour, discussing his book, The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left. And I want to get to the book in just a minute, but first want to get your reaction to the news out yesterday that the grand jury has been convened here and that subpoenas have been issued relating to the 2016 meeting between the president's son and a Russian lawyer. Just your reaction.
I think that this is a little bit of a Frankenstein. Rosenstein created a Frankenstein, if I can put it that way. And the reason is not because there is necessarily any incriminating evidence there. I don't object to looking at it, but I think that having been in D.C. and around D.C. since the 80s, there's a logic to the independent counsel. The independent counsel is sort of tasked with a mission. Now, if he comes back and says there's nothing there, in a sense, he's failed. So he views his success as getting somebody, locking them up, arrest. So there's a logic here that is that makes the whole process not necessarily a search for truth, but rather a way to vindicate the process.
Do you have any concerns with this special counsel, Bob Mueller? Can he conduct a fair investigation?
Well, just from the indications, and I admit that at this level I'm a spectator of events, it looks like he is stalking his team with people who are somewhat hostile to Trump. Now, by itself, in an investigative process, that's not inherently bad, but I do think that it may well be that when you combine ideology with the inherent logic of a special prosecutor's agenda, it becomes a stacked process.
So do you think that process becomes more stacked when we see bills introduced yesterday in the Senate to shield the special counsel from being fired?
Yes, I think that once the process gets going, it's much harder to stop it, because then it looks like you're trying to cover something up, you've got something to hide. As you know, I've been through this judicial process myself, and for exceeding the campaign finance law.
Explain what happened.
Well, what happened is I gave $20,000 over the campaign finance limit to a friend of mine, who was a college friend of mine, who was running for the U.S. Senate. I was, it seems strange to say, but it's in a way naive about campaign finance. I could have given it through a PAC, but I had two of my friends give and I reimbursed them. So that was a violation of law, I admit that. But the process takes on a certain perverse logic. And by that I mean the government comes to you and basically says, we're going to charge you with 3 things which carry 5 years in prison. But if you plead guilty right now, then we'll drop 2 of those charges. So the problem is that whether or not you are guilty, you have a strong incentive to go along. In other words, to plead even to something you didn't do. In my case, the problem wasn't that. It was more of a selective prosecution issue. But leaving that aside, so I've seen the process work, and it's not necessarily a search for truth or justice measured as proportionality. It becomes a little bit, victory is measured by what they can get out of it.
In your case, what did you eventually get convicted of, and
okay, so
how long?
I got a series of penalties. The most serious was 8 months in overnight confinement in a federal confinement center. And then I got a fine. I got 5 years of community service and probation, and obviously it makes you a lifelong felon. Now, ordinarily I'd say, well, all right, but when we looked into it, there is no American who has been prosecuted, let alone locked up, for doing what I did. And so justice isn't just a matter of did you do it, it's a matter of does the penalty fit the crime? Do other guys who did the same thing get the same penalty?
And do you think your previous work was the reason why there was a special interest in you? I
think so, and my reason for thinking is simply this, that once I released a 2016 movie about Obama, the vituperative attacks on the movie appeared regularly on the website barackobama.com. Now, Obama may not write those attacks, but he certainly oversees it. That's his personal website.
And
then shortly after, the FBI comes calling.
And since that movie, there's the latest book, The Big Lie. What is The Big Lie? What is the subject of this book?
The subject of this book is the sort of the central, I would call it meta story of the way that the left is looking at Trump. In the past, the left has played the race card, and But since Trump's election, the big card is not necessarily the race card, it's the fascism card. It's the idea that Trump is a fascist, not Hitler, who started a big world war and gassed 6 million Jews, but Trump is sort of Hitler circa 1933, a demagogue who came promising to make Germany great again. And so the reason this is significant is this isn't just rhetoric. There was some rhetoric that called Reagan a fascist, that called Bush a fascist, but with Trump, it's almost as if to say that although this guy may have won a lawful election, he's illegitimate, he's beyond the bounds, and therefore tactics that would otherwise be unacceptable, let's get the electors to change their votes, let's not even go to the inauguration, let's try to mount some kind of coup against Trump, let's have Antifa protesters block speakers from campus, disrupt the so this stuff would normally be unacceptable. But the people who do it think, well, this is like fighting Hitler in the 30s. Anything is justified by any means necessary.
We had a caller in our first segment call in with the dictionary definition of fascism. Can you define fascism and Nazism, both terms you use a lot in this book?
Yes. Fascism and Nazism are not the same. Hitler very rarely, if ever, called himself a fascist. If you read Mein Kampf, the term fascist almost never appears. Mussolini, who was the quintessential fascist, never identified with Hitler's National Socialism. Now, the main difference between fascism and socialism, fascism is the doctrine of the centralized state. A powerful centralized state running the economy and running your life, that's fascism. Nazism is fascism plus anti-Semitism. So fascism imbued with a deep vein of racism and anti-Semitism, that's the distinguishing feature of Nazi Germany.
And we're taking your calls as we discuss this book and recent events of the past couple days with Dinesh D'Souza with us for about the next 35 minutes. Phone lines are open. Republicans 202-748-8001, Democrats 202-748-8000, Independents 202-748-8002. We'll start with Robert on the phone from Clearwater, Florida. Line for Democrats. Robert, good morning.
Good morning. I'm retired military, and I'm just appalled at this gentleman right here because I watched him many, many times on his favorite channel, Fox On-American, spew lies news all the time. And for him to say on the left, I mean, I'm a wounded warrior, for him to say that the left spews hatred. I served 24 years. I didn't see that many Indian Americans in the military in my 24 years from 83 to 2007. Not many of them, but for him to get on television and continue to make money off of the backs of all the lies that he spewed, especially about this honorable, dignified man called Barack Obama, once married, and continue to support this liar-in-chief we have in office who built his whole career off of denigrating that honorable man. He is the one that has created havoc on our country with his lies, with his racism, with all of this separatist stuff that he's doing right now. And you know what, Mr. Dinesh, you do the same thing. I see you on the Hannity shows. I've seen.
Got your point, Robert. Let's let Dinesh D'Souza respond.
You know, I think this is it's an example of how our political debate tends to break down a little bit. I wrote about Obama and made a movie about Obama. Now, in the movie, I went to Hawaii, I went to Kenya, I went to Indonesia. I was at the Obama family compound. I interviewed Obama's brother. I wanted to expose the fact that Obama wasn't a traditional civil rights guy. That his perspective was anti-colonial, shaped by a kind of international view of the world. This is, by the way, all in Obama's own book. And that also there was a kind of hypocrisy to Obama. Obama was basically saying, we are our brother's keeper. He was demanding of Americans that we make sacrifices for each other. But I said, wait a minute, here's Obama's own brother. He's living in a slum in Nairobi. He lives in a hut. And when you stretch your arms, you touch the walls. I'm like, there's something odd about chanting the slogan, we are our brother's keeper. Here's his own actual brother, and he's done nothing to help him. So, I brought out facts about Obama, allow people to make up their own mind. And Obama and Trump, I agree, are opposites. They're pursuing a very different agenda.
When it comes to Trump, you said that playing the Nazi card stems from the election of Donald Trump. So can one disagree with Donald Trump and not be a fascist?
Oh, yeah.
What tips it in your mind into fascism or Nazism? I know you say that those two terms are not the same.
Yeah, I mean, I'm talking about the guys, for example, who wear masks, they wear costumes, they carry bike locks and brickbats as weapons. If I show up on campus, it's not surprising to have these dudes try to block me from speaking. Now, it's not as if the campuses are overrepresented with conservative viewpoints. Very often, young people today don't even know what a conservative is. They don't know what conservatives want to conserve. And so yet, if you try to squeeze that point of view, I'm there on Monday, I leave on Tuesday, the professor's there every day, and yet they want to block me. So this is a fascist tactic, and yet paradoxically it is carried out in the name of anti-fascism. So I'm faulting those who justify extreme rhetoric and use it to legitimize otherwise unwarranted behavior. I'm not saying that every Democrat is a hate speech monger.
George is in Ocala, Florida. Line for Republicans. George, go ahead.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. I think it's all obstructionism. I don't really think that they have anything on President Trump that is worth taking to the grand jury or any place else. I think that if they say it enough, that people will not see the follow-up story and believe what they heard initially. And I think a lot of it is fake. Now, I want to ask you one question, please, and then I'll go. I, too, am a wounded combat veteran. And you didn't give that guy much time, but, if a black person gets on there, man, you'll let them go for as long as they want to go. And most of the time they say nothing.
George, George, not true. We try to give everybody as much time as we can. We just have a lot of callers we also need to get to as well. So what question do you want to ask Dinesh D'Souza?
Okay, what I wanted to ask the gentleman was that officer, that lifer in the Army, was he correct when he asked you those questions? I pass, thank you.
Oh, I mean, you were clearly, he's talking about the previous caller, I assume, and I think you're dealing with someone who is on one side of the aisle. Our political debate has become so divided that today, if I publish a book, look, I'd be happy to go talk to Rachel Maddow on MSNBC, but I'd never get invited. Essentially, each side talks to its own side. That's regrettable. That's why it's kind of nice that we're alternating calls here. This is one of the few shows where you can actually talk to people on the other side. So I thought his tone was a little strong, but nevertheless, I'm not objecting to it. Now, I think I agree with this caller that I think with Trump, the left's point of view is they want to get him whether or not he did anything. So let's say, for example, that there's no underlying Russia collusion. But Trump said to Comey, hey, there's nothing there. Leave it alone. It's ridiculous. He's telling the truth. There is nothing there. But by saying this to Comey, he's obstructing justice. Now, Nixon obstructed justice, but there was an underlying crime. There was a Watergate burglary, and there was culpable knowledge. So can there be obstruction absent an underlying crime? The left doesn't care.
Ken, Boca Raton, Florida. Line for Independence. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. I'm afraid, Mr. D'Souza, that your polemic is a bridge too far. I mean, if we got to go back to Andrew Jackson, obviously Mr. Trump has been, friendly with American Nazis, with the KKK. He doesn't know David Duke. He's somehow unaware of the other trends in our society and what have you. I think you have to recognize that he in all of his dealings, which historically, I mean, he doesn't pay his subcontractors. He doesn't recognize certain realities that there's nothing there with Russia. Well, let us see if there's anything there with Russia. You got Paul Manafort. You've got all of these individuals who are lobbyists. You had Flynn, who was an unannounced lobbyist for Turkey. I mean, all of the people that served in his cabinet, I mean, are essentially millionaires and billionaires who have absolutely no experience in any of the areas that I think Mr. Perry, when he was nominated for the energy secretary, didn't even know he was responsible for nuclear weapons.
Got your point, Ken.
All right, I'll try to zoom into one or two of the key points here. Number one, with regard to the whole business about racists and the Ku Klux Klan, David Duke is persona non grata in the Republican Party. He's an outlier. No mainstream Republican will embrace him. Now, contrast this with Robert Byrd. Robert Byrd was the conscience of the Senate, the mentor to Hillary, her own term. Obama and Bill Clinton went to his funeral to eulogize him. Now, this guy was a high official in the Ku Klux Klan. And it's important to realize that the Ku Klux Klan was, and I'm now quoting the progressive historian Eric Foner from Columbia University, the Ku Klux Klan was, quote, for 30 years the domestic terrorist arm of the Democratic Party. It was a delegate to the Democratic National Convention who founded the Klan. The Republicans shut down the Klan. President Woodrow Wilson revived the Klan, and the Klan was an extension of Democratic Party violence and terrorism. So to now pick on a handful of ragtag guys and basically go, hey, they endorse Trump because they don't have a job and he wants to make America great again. No, the Klan has an actual history, and the history is closely connected with the history of the Democratic Party. I guess I'll leave it at that.
One section from your book, you write, the fascism card is used to intimidate conservatives and Republicans into renouncing Trump for fear themselves of being branded and smeared. Nazism, after all, is the ultimate form of hate, and association with it, the ultimate hate crime. In this book, I turn the tables on the Democratic left and show that they, not Trump, are the real fascists. They are the ones who use Nazi bullying and intimidation tactics to subscribe to a full-blown fascist ideology. In the sentence before, you said calling somebody that is the ultimate hate crime. Do you fear that you are then doing exactly what you condemn Democrats for by saying that they are the ones who are the Nazis, the fascists?
This is a very fair question because I seem to be turning the tables, and I am turning the tables, but I'm doing it not in a... I don't use Nazism and fascism merely as sort of rhetorical javelins. Usually most people who use the term have either no idea what it means or they're referring to some vague definition that isn't even really right. So, for example, it's commonly said that Trump is a fascist because he's a nationalist. He's an ultra-nationalist, and that makes him a fascist. Now, I know that Gandhi was a nationalist. Mandela was a nationalist. All the anti-colonial leaders were nationalists. Churchill was a nationalist. The American founders were nationalists. Now, obviously, these people weren't fascists. So nationalism does not equal fascism. It's just a wrong definition. So how did we get a wrong definition? We got a wrong definition because after World War II, when fascism and Nazism were stained with the odor of Holocaust, the progressives who were coming to power in the academy and the media, they knew what fascism was. But they said, look, fascism has always been on the left. We need to move it into the right-wing column. So I'm attacking an historical revisionism that redefined fascism to move it from the left-wing column. Remember, Mussolini was a Marxist. He was the leading socialist in Italy. Hitler's party, the National Socialist Party. So Hitler emphasized the socialism and National Socialism, but today the left has taken it out because it's a little bit of a whitewashing operation.
To San Diego, California, Elizabeth Line for Democrats. Good morning.
Good morning. A few years ago, I picked up a book in a thrift shop, and it was called Hitler's Propaganda Machine. And they defined what the real big lie is. And I've seen it employed by the right leading up to this last election for probably the last 20 years with the conservative radio and confluence with Fox News and big money put behind people like Dinesh D'Souza. The big lie is that one tells a lie that's so outrageous that no one would believe that you told the lie on purpose. And then when that untruth is withdrawn, the shadow of the lie remains. And that is the playbook for the right in this country and the conservatives. They tried to demonize Barack Obama and Dinesh D'Souza. I live in San Diego. You had an obscure movie about President Obama, and Doug Manchester owned the San Diego Union Tribune during that election. And there was a front page article about your little tiny movie bashing Barack Obama leading up to the election. And that's what is really causing one of the problems in our country.
Well, first of all, the movie 2016 Obama's America is the second highest grossing political documentary of all time. It's behind only Michael Moore's Fahrenheit 9/11. So it isn't that obscure. It was in 2,000 movie theaters around the country, for example.
Her point about the big lie, it's almost like she's making some of the same points that you make at the beginning of your book about the big lie, just from the other side. But
right. Now, it's important to realize, because, again, many people think Hitler invented this concept of the big lie, and it's a description of Hitler's propaganda. I point out in the first couple of pages of the book, when Hitler used the term the big lie, he wasn't referring to himself. Hitler's point was that the Jews are the ones who are perpetrating the big lie. So what Hitler was saying is that the Jews are evil, the Jews are wicked, the Jews are trying to take over the world, the Jews are willing to use force to achieve their objectives. So what's really interesting is what Hitler is doing is projection. What Hitler is doing is he's taking all the stuff that he actually did and blaming it on the Jews. And so this is called transference, Freud's term. You take your own sins and you project them onto others. And that's what I think the left does here, because the left has a long secret history of complicity with fascism and Nazism. I'll give us a single example. FDR, progressive saint, icon, hero, sent members of his brain trust to Rome in the 30s to study Italian fascism. Why? He saw it as more progressive than the New Deal. He wanted to bring those ideas here. And Mussolini, for his part, was a huge fan of FDR. Mussolini reviews FDR's book in an Italian magazine. He goes, "This guy's a fascist. It's fantastic. He's one of us." So here's my point. This is real history. It's indisputable. It's in the record. But it's not in the textbooks because the textbooks are written by progressives.
The big lie that you're talking about today, is that being coordinated on some level by who? Are there meetings to coordinate this? Explain how this persists.
We're talking here now we're not talking about a conspiracy at all. What we're talking about is the way in which ideas take hold in the culture. I've often thought to myself as I reflect on this book, how do people get to know something that isn't true? How does that happen? Well, the way it happens is the idea begins to circulate, very typically in academia. Then it reverberates through academia. It's picked up by the media. Steven Spielberg makes it into a movie. So the left, I think we would all agree, is pretty dominant in academia, Hollywood, and the media. So it has three huge megaphones in which it can create facts that upon scrutiny turn out not to be true. That's how big lies get disseminated. Not that people are having secret meetings. It's just that people on the same side of the aisle find a theme to be attractive, useful, believable, and they run with it.
And I heard an interview recently in which you said you're interested in getting, not just into documentary films, which you've done, but feature films as well to sort of challenge this.
Yes, because very often ideological messages are transmitted not necessarily by Michael Moore. The big guy in Hollywood isn't Michael Moore, it's Steven Spielberg. And so ideas come through romantic comedies, they come through thrillers, a common theme of movies today is that the businessman is the bad guy. So the anti-business sentiment isn't just argued for in some rhetorical way, it's just shown in every movie, and you pretty much get the idea, gee, if you see this white male business guy running a court, he's going to be the villain. You can almost tell from the beginning of the movie.
So how far are we from Dinesh D'Souza's romantic comedy?
Well, I'm tipping my toe into the water, and so in the next 2 or 3 years, I'll be putting out some feature films alongside documentaries. I just want to expand my portfolio because I'm trying to make a different kind of movie than the little incestuous oligopoly of Hollywood typically makes.
And before then, you're looking to make this book into a documentary as well.
Yes, because the material is so cinematic. Movies are different than books. Not every book can be made into a movie because a book is an argument. A movie is a story, and so I have to ask the question, does this lend itself to a story? Turns out it lends itself to a very exciting story. It has a lot of stuff that people don't even know. And so it becomes a story that is contemporary but has historical depth.
Might be a good time to go to L.A., where Kathleen is waiting, line for Republicans. Kathleen, good morning.
Oh, good morning. I'm a black American woman, and I've voted Democrat all my voting life, except this last time I voted for Trump. Trump, to me, is not an established politician. He's outside the establishment. That is why he is being attacked. You know, they say the proof is in the pudding. The devil is always in the details. I live in the border state of California. I live in the city Los Angeles. I'm a native Los Angelino. If you look at the neighborhoods that blacks used to have in Los Angeles, Watts, Compton, Inglewood, we no longer have those neighborhoods. The Democratic, the biggest lie is that the Democrats have benefited black America. The Democrats have destroyed black America. We no longer have our neighborhoods. We've been overrun by other groups, illegal immigrants. Black unemployment has always been in the double digits. So when black men, I can tell when black men call into this show, because you can recognize them by their voice. All they do is character assassinate.
How do you recognize somebody by their voice, Kathleen?
Because I can recognize a black man's voice. I'm a black woman. It's much deeper. The tone is much deeper, and you can tell by the content of what they're saying. They're attacking Trump. The biggest lie is that the Democrats have benefited black America. The Democrats have destroyed black America.
Got your point, Kathleen. Dinesh D'Souza.
So first of all, I agree. I think that I was reading a book about slavery, a book about the slave plantation, and Kenneth Stamp, the historian, describes the sort of defining features of the old plantation. And he says that they are ramshackle dwellings, broken families, a great deal of violence that is characteristic of the plantation because slavery is based on force. He talks about the fact that no one can get ahead. You're stuck in life. And so, ironically, when I was reading this, it struck me that not a whole lot has changed in the sense that if you walk through inner city Oakland, Detroit, Baltimore, those same features of the old plantation, admittedly in a new form, are still there. You still have broken families, dilapidated dwellings. We send our cops into these places and say, fix it. They can't fix it. The problems are much deeper than that. And so I think the caller is basically saying that the Democratic interest in blacks is votes. But to get those votes, you need a certain degree of dependency, and that's unhealthy.
To Greenbelt, Maryland, Jeffrey is a Democrat. Good morning.
Hello, Dinesh. I think a lot of people misunderstand you. I think you are a businessman. You're selling some type of product. I'm not sure what the product you're selling is yet. But, sometimes I wonder who your biggest competitors are. Ann Coulter or somebody else. Anyhow, I have a few short questions for you. One, you talk about the conviction that you had. Was that a trial by a jury of your peers, or was it something else? You talk about President Obama visiting Kenya. I wonder how long President Obama lived in Kenya. Why would you go to Kenya instead of Kansas? This guy has two parents. He was brought up by the mom, who happens to be from Kansas, who is a white person. But you went to Kenya, and you want to tell us you went to visit his brother that lives in a hut that if you stretch your hand, both hands will touch both ends of the wall. I wonder, if I go to, I think your parents are from India, if I check my hand in their house, will it be more than a hut where they live? I have a lot of questions, but
well, let's take those, Jeffrey. You asked a couple.
Let me address them very quickly. I mean, number one, the first thing I want to make clear is, there's a sort of tendency to think that people who do what they do are being financed from somewhere. And most of Washington, D.C. is, in fact, financed because there are a lot of nonprofits and there are donors who contribute to various causes. I do want to emphasize, I don't have a single donor. Nobody gives me $1 to do anything. If I've prospered and enjoyed the American dream, it's because I write books. I put them in the stores. I give speeches. I get paid for those. I make movies. That's a business. And so this is, I'm not really being funded by anybody. I sometimes wish I was, but it's not the case. Number two, My trial was not by jury. Basically, the government accused me of exceeding the campaign finance law. And then they said, we're going to accuse you of making a false statement to the government. And I said, what's the false statement? They said, oh, no, it's the same thing. By encouraging us to believe that the contribution was from someone else, but whereas it was from you, you made a false statement. Now, that carries 5 years in prison. So I ask you, who's going to take the risk of going for 5 years into prison? It destroys your whole career. So as a result, I pled to the first charge and they dropped the second charge. This is how the government, they use strong arm tactics. They put a second charge on it in order to muscle you into pleading to the first one. That's what happened to me. No jury. Third point, Obama. Well, if you read Dreams from My Father, notice it's Dreams from My Father, not Dreams from My Mother. In Obama's book, he talks about his trip to Kenya, which was, by the way, only 1 month long. But in a book of 200 and some pages, more than 100 pages are focused on that Kenya trip. And so that's why I went to Kenya. I said clearly something formative happened to Obama in Kenya in that short time. And it was because, not surprisingly, he had a lifelong obsession with the father who wasn't there. And his Kenya trip was an effort to find that man. Obama stands, he talks about weeping at his father's grave. This is all in Obama's own work.
To Lockport, New York, Sean is a Republican. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. How are both of you?
Doing well. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. D'Souza, I just wanted to say I did go see Hillary's America, and I enjoyed it very much. I knew the history of the Democratic Party, but not in that much detail. And I was just wondering if either one of you have seen a documentary called A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. It explains a lot about the left and how they've infiltrated the educational system and actually, believe it or not, the priesthood also. So I was just wondering if either one of you have seen that, and if you haven't, I would urge you to.
Go ahead. I'll keep it in mind. I try to watch almost a movie a day, and so I will put that on my list. I haven't seen it. I will say that that this book, just like the Hillary book, has all kinds of new stuff about the complicity between the left and the, in this case, the fascists and the Nazis. I'll give a single example. I don't believe it is known even by educated people that a number of Hitler's most genocidal schemes he lifted directly from America and from the American Democrats. And I'll give a single example of this. We don't have to go back to Jacksonian democracy in the 19th century. The senior Nazis who got together in a room to write the Nuremberg laws. The Nuremberg laws were laws that basically made Jews into second-class citizens, forbade intermarriage between Jews and Germans, later led to confiscation of Jewish property, state-sponsored discrimination. So the Nazis said to themselves, we want to create the world's first racial state. And then one of the senior Nazis, and we have the transcripts of the meeting, he goes, we don't have to create the world's first racial state. The Democrats in the United States have already done that in the South. They have Jim Crow. And so all we need to do is basically take the Jim Crow laws, the segregation laws, the anti-miscegenation laws, which forbid intermarriage between blacks and whites. All we have to do is cross out the word black and write in the word Jew, and we're ready to roll. And so the point I'm trying to make is this is not a case of me drawing an analogy or a parallel between the Democrats and the Nazis. The Nazis actually used the Democratic blueprint in order to put in schemes for Jewish discrimination that later led to the final solution.
Baltimore, Maryland. Sean is an independent. Good morning.
Good morning. I just want to say to Mr. D'Souza, I really don't disagree with you when you attack the left, but here's my problem. You're being a hypocrite. The right, they're just as dangerous. If you look at the KKK nowadays and Richard Spencer and the neo-Nazis, they want to be Republicans. They want to be conservatives. In my opinion, the conservatives are just as dangerous as the liberals. And for you to act like Trump is an angel and he didn't do nothing wrong, it's crazy. It's your type of it is your type of ideology that will lead us to a second civil war, because Trump is destroying the country. Like I said, not disagreeing with you about the left, because Hillary, she's a crook. She should be in jail. But so should Trump, and you should speak more about that, because this country is about to head into a second civil war because of your ideology.
Well, now here we have something to talk about, because Trump, I don't say Trump is an angel. Trump is a big, tough guy. Trump is actually kind of a boss. And the question I ask is, how did we get Trump? Because the Republican Party has actually nominated a whole bunch of straight-laced, decent, you may say, bow-tied guys, going back to Bob Dole and continuing with John McCain, Mitt Romney. Now, these are decent guys, and yet they were converted into Lucifer by the left. Romney was treated as if he was a virtual financial criminal. He was on the defensive. So the Republicans basically said, listen, if we nominate a squeaky clean guy and you make him into Lucifer, how do we fight your thuggish tactics if not by appointing a bit of a bully on our side, a boss on our side, somebody who knows how to throw a punch? And I think that's how we got Trump. It is the breakdown of civility that began with Obama and continued with Hillary. I don't think that Jimmy Carter or let alone Truman or JFK would have done the kind of tactics that Obama did, unleashing the FBI, the instruments of government against your political opposition. That was a new low in American politics. That's the atmosphere that created Trump.
The caller asks about hypocrisy. I want to ask you about some commentary that was in U.S. News and World Report. Nicole Hemmer is contributing editor there. One of the things she touches on in her article, it's ideology out, hucksterism in, and she focuses on this book and you, is your treatment of Democrats and their treatment of American Indians, and that is an inspiration for what eventually happened down the road. She writes, D'Souza writes mournfully of the genocide of American Indians in the early 19th century, which I found curious because in an earlier book in which he denounced the shame narrative of American history, D'Souza flatly stated that there was no genocide of American Indians, that this was just another big lie by the left to make Americans ashamed of their country. But 3 years later, D'Souza now sees an American history not only littered with unspeakable crimes, but one that is responsible for inspiring the Nazis' catalog of horrors. I want to give you a chance to respond.
Yes, and there's a little bit of nuance going on here, because when people accuse America of committing certain crimes, genocide against Native Americans and so on, I would argue that there's a fake genocide and there's a real genocide. So the fake genocide is the genocide blamed on Columbus and the American founders. Let's take Columbus, for example. Columbus did not perpetrate genocide against anybody, but when the white man first came to the American continent, he brought with him diseases that he didn't know about, and to which the American Indians had no immunities. And so there was a massive transfer of disease. There's a whole book about this by the historian William McNeill called Plagues and Peoples. And so genocide requires the intent to wipe out a population. So I would contrast Columbus's non-genocide, which the left is inconsolable about. Columbus was a genocidal maniac. No, he wasn't. Now, the guy who was a genocidal maniac was the founder of the Democratic Party, Andrew Jackson. There's a big difference. Andrew Jackson basically took the Indians, and remember, there were a whole series of treaties between the Indians that had already been made. So the Indians were sitting on land that had been granted to them by treaty. Jackson breaks these treaties. He drives the Indians further west. He produces the horrific event called the Trail of Tears. He almost wipes out the Cherokees as a people. So if you look at the simple UN definition of genocide, intent to wipe out a people, the actual wiping out of the whole or part of those people, their dispossession and relocation, this does not apply to George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or Columbus, but it does apply to the Jacksonian Democrats. Hitler knew it. That's why he appealed to the Jacksonian Democratic example when he said, I love this. He goes, this, what the Jacksonian Democrats did, I'm going to do to the Poles, the Slavs, the Eastern Europeans, the Russians. So Nicole Hemmer is conflating those two things. That's the problem.
I wonder what you'd make of President Trump's interest in Andrew Jackson from Politico, along with mentioning the former president, invoking, praising him. In addition to remarks on Twitter, Trump placed a portrait of Jackson in the Oval Office, made a pilgrimage to the late president's tomb in Nashville less than 2 months after being sworn in.
This is why Trump needs to read my book. This book and also the earlier one, Hillary's America, because Andrew Jackson is not somebody to get all excited about. Now, Trump visited the Jackson plantation. Now, I know from visiting, I visited about 3 presidential libraries. Most of them are propaganda operations. When I went to the Bill Clinton library, for example, it's really funny. You have all this data, number of computers when Bill Clinton came in, number of computers when he left, right? And then a towering image of Bill Clinton as if I did all that. It's It's ridiculous. So I can see how Trump going to the Jackson Library was suckered into believing that Jackson was some kind of great guy. It's a big mistake. I would take Jackson off the bill. I would replace him with a good Republican, Harriet Tubman. And so this is one issue on which a lot of progressives would agree with me. Andrew Jackson was a bad guy, Harriet Tubman the real heroine.
Let's go to Tennessee. Donna is in Chattanooga, line for Democrats. Go ahead.
Hi, I would like to first just say that Edward Snowden probably could help us out with this Democrat, Republican, who's doing right, who is not. Because Russia took him in to further inform the American people of political agendas here in America. The people were being neglected on many levels. The children were first to feel trumped. Someone political had to inform the people whether this person be a journalist whom could be looked at as opportunist at this point, who has the upper hand on keeping dirty little secrets. One could ask Democrats whom has offered ideas to save their seats to give them up if they can't hold Congress accountable and what's being revealed. Since they, as well as Republicans, are in the same boat, take it a bit further to advise them to lead all of them to lead their seats and start advising people who's ready to come, because they're ready to come and help this American situation out.
Yeah, I'd like to address this call, but I also want to pick up a point that was made a little earlier about white power and about this whole notion that these white power guys today are in the Trump camp. I want to try to think about why that is the case, because, see, on the left you now have this sort of umbrella called multiculturalism, and multiculturalism is a doctrine of the affirmation of ethnic identity. Hey, blacks, feel very proud of who you are. Hey, Hispanics, feel very proud of who you are. Hey, Asians, feel very proud of who you are. Hey, whites, no, you take the blame for what everybody else has suffered and you feel really bad about. So this is the problem. Multiculturalism as an umbrella excludes whites. Now, if it included whites, I believe that the Ku Klux Klan's guys and Richard Spencer, or whatever his name is, all these guys would be in the Democratic camp. They would affirm the same ethnic nationalism that all these other groups are encouraged to affirm. But because the construction of the Democratic Party is this Manichaean distinction between all other ethnic groups good and whites bad, it drives the white nationalists out of the Democratic Party, and their only alternative is Trump. So I think that this is why we find the anomaly that because the kind of things that Richard Spencer and these guys believe, this is what the Democratic Party has believed for 150 years. He belongs over there, but the reason he's not over there is there's no room for him.
One more call. Bob in Kingwood, Texas, line for Republicans. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. I'd like to congratulate Mr. D'Souza on his thoughtful and careful decision-making in the way he analyzes situations. First off, the first caller that you guys had today was a Democrat, and he immediately came out with the race side of it, trying to bait Mr. D'Souza into saying something about his Eastern Indian heritage not being in the military and so forth. And that's a typical tactic. But, Mr. D'Souza, a question for you, and this has to do with the media. You know, the first 15 minutes of the CBS News or ABC or NBC this morning always is going to be focusing on Russia and Trump. It's at least 15 to 20 minutes. You mentioned about the media. You'll never be invited on MSNBC or CNN because of just the way that they know your political background. So the media in America has so much power, so much influence. How are you going to break it? I know you said you were going to try to get your own movies and things like that, but how can America take back the most powerful of the four estates, the media, and make it a reasonably unbiased and straightforward presentation of information?
In our last minute or so.
Yeah, seems like a funny way to respond, but the Nazis had a term called Gleichschaltung. Gleichschaltung means coordination. And what the Nazis tried to do is bring all the cultural institutions of society, their universities, the media, their filmmaking industry, into harmony with the priorities of Nazi ideology. I think we have something called Gleichschaltung. It's political correctness, and it's enforced with ruthless intensity. I mean, there's a group in Hollywood called the Friends of Abe. These are conservatives. There are 2,000 of them, but they meet in secret. People actually wear disguises to the meetings. Why? Because if their views were known, they would never work again in that town. So in a way, I'm not so scared of the Antifa thugs at Berkeley on the street. I'm much more scared of the studio bosses and their power. The same is true with the media. I think the good news is because of technology today and social media, there are ways to get information out that bypass the media. If the ordinary citizen feels like I don't have much power, I only have 30 friends on Facebook, well, but each of them have 30 friends on Facebook. So you're a mini publisher. You can actually get information out. So I think that there are countervailing forces today, maybe small, but that can get bigger over time.
The book is The Big Lie, Exposing the Nazi Roots of the American Left. The author is Dinesh D'Souza. We appreciate your time stopping by.
Thank you.
Up next.